Rain didn't just fall that day. It felt like the sky was hammering nails into the pavement. Sarah stood outside the heavy oak doors of the sophisticated Clark and Moore law firm, clutching a plastic bag containing her entire life. Inside, her signature was drying on a document that stripped her of her home, her status, and the man she had loved for 12 years. She turned back one last time, hoping for a glance, a flicker of regret from him. Instead, the blinds snapped shut. She was 34, penniless, and invisible, but she didn't know that in exactly 48 hours. A knock on a different door, a door made of mahogany and reinforced steel, would change the trajectory of history. She walked away a pauper, but she was walking toward a kingdom. The sound of Judge Henry Clark's gavel hitting the cedar block echoed like a gunshot in the sterile silence of courtroom 4B. It was a final, hollow thud that signaled the end of the war. But for Sarah, the casualties were still being counted. "Dissolution granted," the judge muttered, barely looking up from his paperwork. He was a man known in the legal circles of Seattle for his efficiency, not his empathy. Property division as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement stands. Mr. Harrington retains the estate in Bellevue and the primary holdings. Miss Miller receives the stipulated settlement of $10,000. $10,000! Sarah Miller sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard her knuckles turned the color of old bone. $10,000 for 12 years. That didn't even cover the legal fees she owed her attorney, a court-appointed lawyer named Mr. Henderson, who checked his watch every 3 minutes. She looked across the aisle. Daniel Harrington didn't look at her. He was busy adjusting the cuff of his bespoke Italian suit, a suit Sarah had picked out for him in Milan 3 years ago, back when they were happy, back when she was the trophy wife and he was the rising tech mogul. Sitting next to Daniel was not his lawyer, but her, Jessica, 22, blonde, with eyes that looked like predatory jewels. Jessica was Daniel's personal assistant, the classic cliché that Sarah had been too trusting to see coming. Jessica whispered something in Daniel's ear, and he smirked. That smirk shattered whatever hope Sarah had left of a dignified exit. "Ms. Miller." The judge's voice was impatient. "Do you understand the ruling?" Sarah's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, forcing her spine to straighten. She was a Miller, after all, even if that name meant nothing in this city anymore. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand." "Very well. Court adjourned." The room broke into movement. Briefcases snapped shut. Chairs scraped against the floor. Sarah stood up, her legs trembling. She felt lightheaded, a result of not eating for 3 days. Daniel stood up and finally turned toward her. He walked over, the scent of Santal 33, his signature cologne wafting toward her like a toxic memory. "Daniel," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "The house. My mother's piano is still in the guest room. Can I at least—" "It's gone." "Sarah," Daniel said, his voice smooth and cold, like polished glass. "I had the cleaners clear the guest wing this morning. Everything was sent to Goodwill, or the dump. I didn't really check the itemized list." Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. "My mother's piano." "You threw away my dead mother's piano. You signed the papers." "Sarah," Jessica interjected, stepping between them. Her smile was sharp enough to cut skin. "Contents of the home remain with the primary owner. Maybe you should have read the fine print instead of crying in the bathroom." Daniel chuckled, draped his arm around Jessica's waist, and turned his back on his wife of over a decade. Good luck, Sarah. You're going to need it." They walked out, surrounded by a phalanx of high-priced attorneys, leaving Sarah standing alone in the empty courtroom. Mr. Henderson, her lawyer, stuffed his files into a battered leather bag. "Look, Ms. Miller," he said, avoiding eye contact. "It's a tough break, but Daniel Harrington has the best legal team in Washington. We were lucky to get the 10 grand. My invoice will be in the mail." He left. Sarah walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding grey rain of a Seattle autumn. She had no umbrella. The water soaked her cheap blazer instantly, plastering her hair to her face. She stood on the curb, watching the sleek black town car, Daniel's car, pull away from the curb. Through the tinted back window, she saw the silhouette of 2 people kissing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from her landlord. Her credit cards had been cancelled at 9 a.m. sharp. She began to walk. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving or she would collapse right there on the wet pavement. She walked past the high-end boutiques where she used to shop, past the restaurants where the maitre d's knew her name. Now, she was just a wet, shivering woman in last season's shoes. She walked until her heels blistered and bled. She walked until the skyscrapers gave way to the grimy brick tenements of the industrial district. She found a bus stop bench and sat down, the cold metal seeping into her bones. "Is this it?" she whispered to the rain. "Is this how it ends?" A black sedan, distinct from Daniel's, slowed down as it passed her. It wasn't a town car, it was a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, immaculate and imposing. The window rolled down just an inch, pausing as if observing her, before rolling back up and gliding away into the mist. Sarah didn't notice. She just put her head in her hands and wept. 3 weeks later, the apartment smelled of boiled cabbage and damp drywall. It was a basement studio in a part of the city Sarah had previously only seen on the news during crime reports. The view was a brick wall and a dumpster that was currently overflowing with wet cardboard. Sarah sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the piece of toast in her hand. It was her dinner. Her bank account balance was currently $42.18. The $10,000 settlement had vanished instantly, swallowed by debts Daniel had secretly put in her name, the deposit on this rat-hole apartment, and the remaining legal fees her useless lawyer had demanded. She had applied for 20 jobs, retail, waitressing, reception, nothing. Her resume was a disaster, a 12-year gap where her occupation was philanthropist and hostess in the eyes of the corporate world. She was expired goods. A heavy fist pounded on her door. "Miller, open up." It was Mr. Kowalski, the landlord, a man who looked like he was carved out of granite and smelled of cigar smoke. Sarah opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. "Mr. Kowalski, please, I get paid for the cleaning gig on Friday. I'll have the rest of the rent then." "Friday isn't today," Kowalski grunted, shoving a piece of paper through the crack. "Eviction notice. You got 3 days. Washington law says I gotta give you notice. So here it is. 3 days, or I call the sheriff." He stomped away, leaving Sarah holding the paper. She slid to the floor, her back against the door. 3 days. She would be homeless in 3 days. She looked at the small pile of mail on the floor that Kowalski had kicked under the door, a flyer for a pizza place, a final notice from a credit card company, and a thick, cream-colored envelope. It stood out against the grime of the floor, There was no stamp. It had been hand-delivered. Sarah picked it up. The paper was heavy, textured, expensive. On the front, in elegant calligraphy, was her name, Mrs. Sarah Miller, not Harrington. Miller. She tore it open. Inside was a single card with gold embossed edges. To Ms. Sarah Miller, your presence is requested at the Obsidian Manor, regarding a position of significant domestic responsibility. Tuesday, 8:00 p.m., attire formal. Do not be late. There was no signature, only an address. Sarah frowned. The Obsidian Manor. She knew the name. Everyone in the state knew the name. It was the legendary estate located on the jagged cliffs of the Olympic Peninsula, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It belonged to the Sterlings, an old money family so private that rumors said they hadn't been seen in public since the late 90s. Why would they want her? How did they find her? It's a scam, she muttered, tossing the card on the table. Or a prank? Daniel probably set this up to humiliate me. She looked around the room. The peeling paint, the mold in the corner, the eviction notice. What choice did she have the next evening? Sarah spent her last few dollars on a bus ticket to the coast. She wore the only dress Daniel hadn't thrown away, a simple black cocktail dress that she had managed to hide in her garment bag. It was elegant, timeless, and luckily, black hid the stains of the rain. The bus dropped her off at the bottom of a winding private road. The driver looked at her with pity. You sure about this, lady? That house? People say it's haunted or cursed. Nobody goes up there. I have nowhere else to go, Sarah said, tightening her coat against the fierce coastal wind. She walked for 2 miles uphill. The wind howled, whipping her hair across her face. The iron gates of the Obsidian Manor loomed out of the fog like the jaws of a beast. They were 20 feet high, topped with gargoyles. As she approached, the gates groaned and slowly swung open, operated by some unseen mechanism. Sarah stepped through. The driveway was lined with ancient cedar trees that blocked out the moonlight. At the end of the drive stood the house, a sprawling Gothic revival mansion made of dark stone. With turrets piercing the sky, most of the windows were dark, but a single light burned in a room on the 2nd floor. She reached the massive front door. There was no doorbell, only a heavy brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. She hesitated, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was insanity. She should turn back. She should go back to the bus stop and sleep on the bench. But the image of Jessica's smirk flashed in her mind. You're going to need luck. Sarah grabbed the brass ring and slammed it down. Clang! 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 Silence. She waited for a minute, then 2. She turned around, ready to leave, defeated. Then, the sound of heavy bolts sliding back echoed through the wood. The door creaked open. Standing there was not a butler, not a maid. It was a man. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorframe. He wore a tuxedo, but the tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck. His hair was dark, swept back, touched with silver at the temples. His face was rugged, marked by a scar that ran through his left eyebrow, giving him an air of danger. But it was his eyes that stopped Sarah's breath. They were steel grey, piercing, and intensely intelligent. He looked at her wet shoes. He looked at her shivering hands. He looked at the determination in her jaw. And then, the billionaire Ethan Sterling. The recluse, the man rumors said was a monster, did something impossible. He smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile like Daniel's. It was warm. It was sad. It was familiar. "You're late, Sarah," he said, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "I've been waiting for you for a very long time." Sarah blinked, confused. You know who I am." Ethan stepped back and gestured for her to enter the warmth of the grand foyer. "Know you?" Ethan laughed softly, a sound that felt like velvet. "My dear Sarah, I'm the reason you're here, and I'm the only one who knows the truth about why Daniel Harrington destroyed your life." He extended a hand. "Come in. The game is just beginning." The heavy oak door thudded shut, sealing out the howling wind and the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs. The silence inside the foyer was absolute, heavy with the scent of old books, burning cedar, and something metallic like the smell of ozone before a storm. Sarah stood dripping onto a Persian rug that likely cost more than Daniel's car. She shivered, not just from the cold, but from the sheer presence of the man standing before her. Ethan Sterling moved with the predatory grace of a panther. He didn't ask if she wanted a towel. Instead, he walked toward a side table, poured an amber liquid into a crystal glass, and held it out to her. "Brandy," he commanded softly. "Drink. You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah took the glass, her fingers brushing against his. His skin was warm, rough, and calloused the hands of a man who worked. Not the manicured hands of a corporate leech like Daniel. She downed the drink in one burn. It hit her empty stomach like a fist, but the warmth spread instantly. "You said you know Daniel," Sarah said, her voice stronger now. "You said you know why he destroyed me. Who are you? Really?" Ethan leaned against the grand staircase, crossing his arms. The scar over his eye twitched slightly as he studied her. "To the world. I am Ethan Sterling, the eccentric recluse who inherited a dying shipping empire," he began. "But to Daniel Harrington, I am the man he thought he buried 10 years ago." He pushed off the banister and began to pace. "Daniel didn't build Harrington Tech. He stole it. 10 years ago. I was the lead engineer at a startup called Nexus. Daniel was the accountant. He embezzled millions, framed me for corporate espionage, and sold my prototype to a defense contractor while I was busy fighting a federal indictment. I lost everything, my reputation, my freedom for 18 months, and my fiancée, who left me for, well, let's just say she had a taste for winners." Sarah's eyes widened. "Daniel, he told me he built his company from a garage in Palo Alto. Daniel couldn't code a website if his life depended on it." Ethan scoffed. "He's a vampire. Sarah, he feeds on people. He fed on me, and for the last 12 years, he fed on you. He used your family's connections, your father's reputation in the Senate, to wash his reputation clean. And once he got the government contracts he wanted, he discarded you." Sarah felt a wave of nausea. It made sense. The sudden divorce came right after her father passed away. Her usefulness had expired. "Why am I here?" Sarah asked, putting the empty glass down. "If you hate him, why summon me? I'm nothing. I have $10 and a suitcase of wet clothes." Ethan stopped pacing. He walked up to her, invading her personal space. He smelled of rain and expensive tobacco. "Because, Sarah Miller, Daniel made a mistake. A fatal one." Ethan's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "The prenuptial agreement you signed, the one he forced you into. It gave him everything," Sarah whispered. "Not everything," Ethan corrected. "Daniel is arrogant. He used a standard template for the asset division, But he forgot about the intellectual property clause. According to Washington state law, and the specific wording of that document, any patent filed jointly or with spousal contribution during the marriage is community property. Sarah shook her head. I didn't contribute. I was just a housewife. Think. Sarah, Ethan urged, his voice intense. 3 years ago, the Project Chimera algorithm. He was stuck. He was drunk at the kitchen table, screaming that the logic loops were failing. What did you do? Sarah's mind flashed back. A rainy Tuesday. Daniel, disheveled and panicked. She had looked at the whiteboard. She had a degree in mathematics, a degree Daniel always mocked and told her to forget. She had picked up a marker. You're missing the variable for the latency delay, she had said. Just invert the matrix. I fixed the equation, Sarah whispered. You solved the problem that made him a billionaire, Ethan said triumphantly. And because you did that, legally, half of that algorithm belongs to you. But you can't fight him with a public defender. You need a shark. You need a war chest. Ethan extended his hand again. I need a face to return to society. I need a wife to make the board of directors trust me again, so I can launch my hostile takeover of his company. And you need revenge. You want me to marry you? Sarah asked, incredulous. A marriage of convenience, Ethan said. 1 year. In exchange, I hire the best legal team in the country to enforce your rights on that algorithm. We strip Daniel of his fortune. We take his company. And then we walk away. You get half his billions. I get his destruction. And if I refuse, then you walk back out that door, Ethan said coldly, and Daniel wins. Sarah looked at the door. She thought of the eviction notice. She thought of Jessica's smirk. She thought of her mother's piano in the dump. She looked back at Ethan Sterling, the monster in the tuxedo. Where do I sign? The next morning. Sarah woke up in a bed that was larger than her entire previous apartment. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, so soft they felt like water against her skin. For a moment, she thought it was a dream. Then she saw the view. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the churning grey Pacific Ocean. There was a knock on the door. A severe-looking woman with grey hair pulled into a tight bun entered. She carried a tray of fruit and coffee. Good morning, Mrs. Sterling, or should I say, future Mrs. Sterling, the woman said, her face devoid of emotion. I am Martha, the housekeeper. Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the library. He says the tailors have arrived. Tailors? Sarah sat up, clutching the duvet. We have a schedule to keep, Martha said, dropping a silk robe on the bed. The Harrington Gala is in 3 days. You have much to learn before then. The next 72 hours were a blur of pain and transformation. Ethan wasn't just giving her a makeover. He was reconstructing her. A team of stylists from Paris flew in. They cut her hair, dyeing it from her mousy brown to a rich, dark chestnut that caught the light. They taught her how to walk, not the submissive shuffle she had adopted to avoid angering Daniel, but a stride of purpose. But the hardest lessons came from Ethan himself. In the evenings, they sat in the library, a fire roaring in the hearth. Ethan drilled her on finance, on corporate law, on the weaknesses of Daniel's board members. Stand up straight, Ethan barked, pacing around her. You are not a victim. Sarah, you are a weapon. When you walk into that room, you don't look at the floor. You look through them. I can't, Sarah said, dropping into a chair, exhausted. Daniel. He knows how to make me feel small. He knows my buttons." Ethan stopped. He knelt in front of her, bringing his face level with hers. For the first time, his expression wasn't calculating. It was fierce, almost protective. "Daniel knows the Sarah he broke," Ethan said quietly. "He doesn't know the Sarah I am building. He thinks he's a lion, Sarah, but he's just a hyena who got lucky. You survived 12 years in a cage with him. That makes you stronger than he will ever be." He reached out and tucked a strand of her new hair behind her ear. His touch lingered a second too long. Sarah felt a jolt of electricity run down her spine, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She looked at his lips, then up to his grey eyes. He pulled back abruptly, clearing his throat. "Get some sleep," he said, standing up and turning away. "Tomorrow, we go to war." The night of the Harrington Gala arrived. It was the social event of the season, held at the Space Needle. The entire city's elite were there to celebrate Daniel's new government contract. Daniel stood at the center of the room, holding court. He wore a white tuxedo jacket, looking every bit the triumphant king. Jessica hung on his arm, wearing a dress that was too sparkly and too short, diamonds dripping from her neck, diamonds that Sarah recognized as her grandmother's, which Daniel had claimed were lost during the move. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel bellowed into the microphone, raising a glass of champagne. "Tonight marks a new era. Harrington Tech is now the exclusive provider for the Department of Defense's cybersecurity." Applause thundered. Jessica beamed. "And I want to thank my partner in all this," Daniel said, looking down at Jessica, "my muse." Suddenly, the music cut out. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. The double doors at the entrance swung open. A spotlight hit the doorway. Ethan Sterling stepped in. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo, tailored to perfection. The crowd gasped. The recluse, the monster of the peninsula. He had returned, but the gasps grew louder when he turned and offered his hand to the woman behind him. Sarah stepped into the light. She was wearing a gown of liquid red silk that clung to every curve, with a slit that ran up to her thigh. Her hair cascaded in waves over her shoulders. Around her neck was a necklace of black diamonds that made Jessica's jewelry look like costume glass. She didn't look at the floor. She didn't hunch her shoulders. She looked straight ahead, her chin lifted, radiating a cold, terrifying beauty. The room went dead silent. Daniel dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing in the quiet. "Sarah," he mouthed, his face draining of color. Ethan placed a possessive hand on the small of Sarah's back and guided her into the room. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. They walked straight up to Daniel and Jessica. Jessica looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "What are you doing here? You weren't invited." Security. "Actually," Ethan said, his voice projecting effortlessly to the back of the room, "as the owner of Sterling Holdings, which just acquired a 51% controlling stake in the venue hosting this event, I believe I own the building." He turned his cold grey eyes to Daniel. "Hello." "Daniel, remember me?" Daniel stuttered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "Ethan, I thought you were destitute." "I was," Ethan smiled, a shark's smile. "But then I found something valuable, or rather, someone you were foolish enough to throw away." He pulled Sarah closer. "May I introduce my fiancée, the future Mrs. Sterling, and of course, your new majority shareholder, The room erupted in whispers. Sarah stepped forward, her red heels clicking on the glass shards of Daniel's broken flute. She leaned in close to her ex-husband, close enough to smell the fear on him. "Hello, Daniel," she purred, her voice steady and lethal. "I believe we need to talk about my alimony. But first, I'd like my grandmother's necklace back." She reached out and, with a swift, violent tug, ripped the necklace from Jessica's neck. The clasp snapped. Jessica screamed. Sarah held the diamonds up to the light, inspecting them, then dropped them into her clutch. "Nice party," Sarah said. "Shame it's over." She turned to Ethan. "Buy me a drink, darling." "Anything for you, my love," Ethan said, as they walked away toward the bar, leaving a stunned Daniel and a sobbing Jessica in their wake. Sarah felt her heart pounding, but it wasn't fear. For the first time in her life, she felt power. But as Ethan handed her a drink, he leaned in and whispered in her ear, "Don't get too comfortable. Sarah, that was the easy part. Look at the man in the grey suit by the emergency exit." Sarah glanced over. A man with a scarred face and military posture was watching them. He had a hand inside his jacket. "Who is that?" she whispered. "That," Ethan said, his grip tightening on her waist, "is the man Daniel hired to kill me 10 years ago, and it looks like he's just accepted a new contract." The elevator doors of the Space Needle slid shut, cutting off the murmur of the stunned crowd and the shrill sound of Jessica's sobbing. The silence in the small metal box was deafening. Sarah leaned against the mirrored wall, her chest heaving. The adrenaline that had carried her through the ballroom was crashing, leaving her hands trembling. She looked at Ethan. The mask of the arrogant billionaire had slipped. His jaw was clenched tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek, and his grey eyes were fixed on the floor numbers counting down. "Ethan," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "You said that man was a killer. Are we in danger?" Ethan didn't look at her. He hit the button for the parking garage B3 and then pressed his thumb against a hidden sensor on his cufflinks. A tiny red light blinked. A distress signal. "Daniel isn't just a thief. Sarah, he's a coward," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. "And cowards hire people like Victor Kane to clean up their messes. I thought Kane retired to the Cayman Islands. If he's back, Daniel must be desperate. He knows the audit is coming." "What audit?" "The one I triggered this morning, when I bought the majority shares," Ethan said, finally looking at her. His eyes were dark. "I didn't just buy the venue, Sarah. I bought the bank that holds Daniel's debt. I own him, and he knows that if he loses the company, he loses his immunity." The elevator dinged. B3. The doors opened into the cold, concrete expanse of the VIP parking garage. It was empty, save for Ethan's Rolls-Royce and a grey van parked near the exit ramp. "Stay behind me," Ethan commanded. He didn't reach for a weapon, he didn't have one, but his posture shifted into something lethal. They walked toward the car. The echo of their footsteps was the only sound. Then, the grey van's sliding door opened. The man from the ballroom, Victor Kane, stepped out, up close. He was even more terrifying. His face was a map of violence. A jagged scar ran from his ear to his chin. He held a suppressed pistol loosely at his side, as if it were an extension of his hand. "Mr. Sterling," Kane said, his voice like gravel grinding in a mixer. "It's been a decade. You look... well..." Ethan stopped, shielding Sarah with his body. "Kane, I see Daniel is still paying top dollar for mediocrity. How much is he giving you? $500,000. Kane smirked. Inflation, sterling, $2 million. Plus a bonus if I make it look like a carjacking gone wrong. He raised the gun, aiming it squarely at Ethan's chest. Step away from the girl. The contract is for you. The wife is just collateral. Sarah froze. She grabbed the back of Ethan's jacket, her knuckles white. She's not his wife anymore, Ethan said calmly. And if you pull that trigger, Kane, you'll never spend a dime of that money. And why is that? Because, Ethan said, glancing at his watch, you're standing on a pressure plate. Kane blinked. He looked down. He was standing on plain concrete. In that split second of distraction, Ethan moved. He didn't run away. He lunged forward. He covered the 10 feet between them with terrifying speed. Kane brought the gun up, but Ethan chopped his wrist with a sickening crack. The gun skittered across the floor. Kane roared and swung a heavy fist, catching Ethan in the ribs. Sarah heard the thud of impact, a sound that made her stomach turn. Ethan grunted, but didn't back down. He used the momentum to pivot, driving his knee into Kane's stomach and slamming the assassin's head against the side of the van. Kane slumped to the ground, unconscious. Ethan staggered back, clutching his side. He was breathing hard, his face pale. Ethan! Sarah screamed, running to him. Oh my God, you're hurt. Get in the car! Ethan wheezed, pulling the keys from his pocket. He won't stay down for long. We have to go. Now. They scrambled into the Rolls-Royce. Ethan's hands shook slightly as he started the engine. He roared out of the garage, tires screeching, smashing through the wooden barrier arm at the exit, as they sped onto the rainy streets of Seattle, merging into the traffic. Sarah looked over at him. There was a dark stain spreading on the white shirt beneath his tuxedo jacket. You're bleeding, she said, panic rising in her throat. Old stitches tore. Ethan lied through gritted teeth. I'll be fine. We're going to the airfield. We can't go back to the manor tonight. It's too exposed. The airfield. We're going to a safe house, Ethan said, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. Somewhere Daniel can't find us. Somewhere we can finish this war. Sarah looked out the window at the city blurring past. The rain was falling harder now, washing away the world she used to know. She realized, with a terrifying clarity, that there was no going back. The Sarah Miller who cried over a piano was dead. She was now the accomplice of a dangerous man. And God help her. She didn't want to be anywhere else. The safe house was a misnomer. It was a fortress disguised as a log cabin, deep in the Cascades, accessible only by a dirt road that Ethan navigated with the skill of a rally driver. Inside, the cabin was cold and smelled of pine. Ethan collapsed onto the leather sofa the moment they were inside, his face grey with pain. First aid kit, he rasped, pointing to a cabinet in the kitchen. Under the sink. Get the whiskey too. Sarah moved on autopilot. She found the kit a military-grade box and a bottle of Macallan 25. When she returned to the living room, Ethan had taken off his jacket and unbuttoned his shirt. Sarah gasped. His torso was a tapestry of scars, burn marks, knife wounds, and a jagged line running down his ribs where Kane had hit him. It wasn't bleeding profusely, but the bruising was already turning a deep, angry purple. Daniel didn't just ruin your reputation, Sarah whispered, kneeling beside him with the antiseptic. He tortured you. Ethan took a long pull from the whiskey bottle, wincing as the alcohol hit his system. Daniel hired a private military contractor to extract the encryption keys from me in a basement in unstable territory. I didn't break. That's why he framed me instead. It was cleaner. Sarah poured alcohol on a cloth and began to clean his wounds. Her hands were surprisingly steady. Every time she touched him, a tremor went through his body. "Why me?" "Ethan," she asked softly, her eyes focused on his skin. "You could have hired anyone to play your wife. A model, an actress. Why did you choose the woman who was married to your enemy?" Ethan went silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fire he had managed to light before collapsing. He reached out and caught her hand, stopping her. "Look at me." "Sarah." She looked up. His eyes were unguarded now, stripped of the billionaire's arrogance. "I didn't choose you because of Daniel," he said, his voice rough. "I chose you because of the gala tonight." "No," Ethan said. "The winter gala. 7 years ago." Sarah frowned. "I remember that night. I was hiding in the library." "I know," Ethan said. "I was there too. I had snuck in, trying to get close to a server to steal data. I was hiding behind the curtains. You came in. You were crying because Daniel had yelled at you in front of the senator. You thought you were alone." Sarah's breath hitched. She remembered. She had sat on the floor, weeping, feeling entirely worthless. "You sat at the piano," Ethan continued softly, "and you played Chopin, Nocturne in C-sharp minor. You played it with so much pain, so much anger. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. In that moment, watching you, I realized you weren't one of them. You were a prisoner, just like me. I vowed that night that if I ever got my power back, I wouldn't just destroy Daniel. I would free you." Sarah stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You've been watching me for 7 years." "I've been waiting for you for 7 years," he corrected. The air between them grew heavy, charged with a decade of silence and sudden, overwhelming proximity. Sarah looked at his lips. The man who had saved her. The man who had taken a bullet or a fist for her. She didn't think. She leaned in. Ethan met her halfway. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was desperate. It tasted of whiskey and rain and danger. Sarah's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. Ethan groaned low in his throat, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her onto the sofa with him. For the first time in 12 years. Sarah didn't feel like an accessory. She felt desired. She felt consumed. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, blindingly bright. Sarah woke up alone on the sofa, covered by a heavy wool blanket. The fire was dead ash. "Ethan," she called out. Silence. Panic flared in her chest. Had he left? Had Kane come back? She stood up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. She saw a file folder on the kitchen table. It wasn't the one from the manor. This one was black, stamped with the logo of the FBI. Next to it was a note. "Sarah, I went to finish it. Stay here until Gideon comes for you. Read the file. You need to know the full truth before I come back. I'm sorry." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the black folder. The first page was a mug shot, but it wasn't Daniel, and it wasn't Ethan. It was her, subject Sarah Miller Harrington, charge conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, international racketeering, status pending indictment. She flipped the page. There were bank transfers, hundreds of them. Millions of dollars moved from Harrington Tech to offshore shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. All of them were signed with her digital signature. She flipped to the summary. Evidence suggests Mrs. Harrington is the mastermind behind the laundering operation known as Project Chimera. Daniel Harrington is cooperating with federal authorities as a witness against his wife. Sarah dropped the file. The room spun. It wasn't just about the algorithm. It wasn't just about the divorce. Daniel had set her up. For 12 years, every document he asked her to sign, every trust fund he opened in her name. He was building a frame. He was going to send her to prison for the crimes he committed for the cartel. And Ethan, she reread the note. I went to finish it. Ethan knew. He knew the FBI was coming for her. That's why he took her. That's why he married her fast. She grabbed her phone. She had to call him. She had to warn him that Daniel had the feds. She turned the phone on. It instantly pinged with a voicemail. It was from Daniel. Sarah. Daniel's voice oozed through the speaker, sounding frantic. Listen to me carefully. Ethan Sterling is playing you. He's the one who planted the evidence. He's working with the feds to frame us both to get his company back. I can save you, baby. I have a deal on the table. But you have to come to the docks. Pier 54. Alone. If you stay with him, you're going to jail for life. Don't trust the monster. Sarah, come home. Sarah stood in the silent cabin, the phone burning in her hand. The file said she was the criminal. Daniel said Ethan was the traitor. Ethan said nothing. Only I'm sorry. She looked at the car keys Ethan had left on the counter. She had to choose the man who broke her heart or the man who might be selling her soul. She grabbed the keys. She wasn't going to the docks, and she wasn't waiting for Gideon. She was going to the one place where the truth was hidden. Back to the beginning. Rain slashed against the windshield as Sarah sped down I-5, the city lights of Seattle blurring into streaks of neon and regret. She wasn't going to Pier 54 to meet Daniel. That was a trap. She wasn't going back to the cabin to wait for Gideon. That was a cage. She drove straight to the belly of the beast, Harrington Tech headquarters. It was 3 a.m. The skyscraper was dark, save for the emergency lights and the glow from the 41st floor, Daniel's office. She knew his codes. She knew the override for the service elevator. She knew where he kept the physical backups, the ones he was too paranoid to put on the cloud. She bypassed security with an old keycard Daniel hadn't bothered to deactivate, banking on his arrogance. She's just a housewife, he would have thought. She doesn't know how to operate a server room. But Sarah remembered that rainy Tuesday. She remembered fixing his code. She remembered everything. She reached the server room on the 39th floor. It was freezing, the hum of the cooling fans deafening. She sat at the main terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. She took a breath. She closed her eyes. She thought of the music. The logic of code was like the logic of Chopin, a structure, a rhythm, a flaw. She typed in a sequence she had seen Daniel use once when he was drunk, a back door he called God mode. Access granted. Files flooded the screen, not just the algorithm, the shell companies, the laundering, the emails to Victor Kane, the emails to the FBI agent who was on Daniel's payroll, and then a folder labeled Sarah_frame_job. She opened it. It was all there. Forged signatures. Fake IP addresses routed through her old laptop. A complete fabrication designed to send her to prison for 20 years, while Daniel walked away with billions. Got you, she whispered. She inserted a flash drive. The progress bar crawled. 10%, 40%. Impressive. a voice said from the doorway. Sarah spun around. Daniel stood there. He wasn't alone. Victor Kane was with him, nursing a bruised jaw, his gun drawn. "I didn't think you had it in you." "Sarah," Daniel said, shaking his head. "Hacking my mainframe, who taught you that? Your new boyfriend, he taught me to stand up," Sarah said, her voice steady. She didn't pull the drive. "It's over. Daniel, the upload is halfway done. It's going straight to the SEC and the real FBI." "Stop the upload," Daniel barked, stepping forward. "Shoot her," Kane growled. "No," Daniel snapped. "If she dies here, it looks suspicious. We need her to sign the confession first." He looked at Sarah with mock pity. "Ethan isn't coming. Sarah, I sent him a text from your phone. He thinks you're at the pier. My guys are waiting for him. He's probably dead by now." Sarah's heart stopped. "Ethan, you monster," she hissed. "Business, Sarah. Just business." Daniel pulled a document from his jacket. "Sign this. It says you acted alone. You take the fall. I get the company. And maybe I let you live in a nice federal prison instead of a ditch." Sarah looked at the screen. 80%. She looked at the gun. She looked at Daniel. And then the glass wall of the server room shattered. A figure swung in from the window washing rig outside, crashing through the tempered glass in a shower of shards. It was Ethan. He hit the ground, rolling, wet, bloody, and magnificent. He didn't hesitate. He launched himself at Kane before the assassin could turn. "Sarah, the drive!" Ethan roared as he tackled Kane into a server rack. Sparks flew as metal crunched. Daniel lunged for the terminal. Sarah blocked him. She wasn't strong, but she was fast. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with everything she had. Clang! It connected with Daniel's ribs. He howled and fell back, clutching his chest. "That's for the piano," Sarah screamed. She turned back to the screen. 99%. Kane had thrown Ethan off. He raised his gun, aiming at Sarah's back. "No," Ethan shouted. He scrambled, throwing himself in the path of the bullet. Bang! Ethan jerked violently, hitting the floor. "Ethan!" Sarah screamed. Upload complete. The screens all turned red. Alarms began to blare throughout the building. System lockdown. Authorities notified. Kane looked at the flashing lights, then at Ethan, bleeding on the floor. He cursed, holstered his weapon, and ran for the exit. He wasn't going to stick around for the cops. Daniel struggled to his feet, his face pale with terror. He looked at Sarah, then at the red screens. He knew it was over. His empire was gone. He ran. He ran like the coward he was, chasing Kane into the stairwell. Sarah dropped to her knees beside Ethan. He was clutching his shoulder. Blood was seeping through his fingers, staining the white shirt crimson. "Ethan, stay with me." She ripped off her scarf and pressed it against the wound. "Why did you come? You knew it was a trap." Ethan coughed, a weak smile forming on his lips. He reached up and touched her face with a bloody hand. "I told you," he whispered, his voice raspy. "I've been waiting for you for 7 years. I wasn't going to let you face him alone." "You idiot," she sobbed, kissing his forehead. "You brave, stupid idiot." "Did you get him?" Sarah looked at the screen, where the words "evidence sent" were flashing. "We got him," she said. "We got them all." Sirens wailed in the distance. Getting louder, Ethan groaned, trying to sit up. "Sarah, the police. They'll arrest you too. The warrant." "Let them come," Sarah said, holding him tighter. "I have the proof now. I'm not running anymore. And neither are you. She leaned down and kissed him. A kiss of promise, of victory, and of a love that had survived the storm. "We're going to walk out of here together, Ethan, or we don't walk out at all." The doors to the server room burst open. SWAT teams poured in, shouting commands. Sarah raised her hands, not in surrender, but in defiance. Beside her, Ethan Sterling, the billionaire who had opened the door, held her hand. They didn't look like criminals. They looked like kings and queens of a new world. 6 months later, the headline of the Seattle Times read, "Harrington sentenced to 25 years. Sterling acquitted." Sarah stood on the balcony of the Obsidian Manor, the wind whipping her hair. She wasn't wearing black anymore. She wore white. Behind her, Ethan stepped out, holding 2 glasses of champagne. His arm was in a sling, but he looked healthy, vibrant. "To new beginnings," he said, handing her a glass. "To the end of the game," Sarah replied, clinking her glass against his. She looked out at the ocean. She had her own company now, a cybersecurity firm. She started with the settlement money. She had her name back, and she had him. Ethan wrapped his good arm around her waist. "So, Mrs. Sterling, what's next?" Sarah smiled, a smile that reached her eyes. "I was thinking," she said, leaning back against him. "We should buy a piano." Ethan laughed, the sound echoing over the cliffs. "I think we can afford a few." He kissed her. And as the sun set over the Pacific, Sarah knew that the story wasn't over. It was just the first chapter of a life she had finally chosen for herself. And that, my friends, is the story of how Sarah Miller walked away from a billionaire only to find a love and a power she never expected. It reminds us that sometimes rock bottom is just the solid foundation we need to build something new. Sarah didn't just get revenge, she got justice, and she found her own voice in the process. What did you think of Ethan's sacrifice? Would you have gone to the server room alone like Sarah did? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, romance, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new dramas every Tuesday and Friday. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.